industry experts, or there's no real people who are in power that are talking inside these social justice movements online. Like, even though there's very, very few, and their opinions are not really as highlighted. And a lot of these people are just victims who are affected by these sort of movements. And a new policy change of getting government involved is very, very rare in these sort of social movements, unless, like you have the BLM example, unless someone dies. And that is the only time the social justice movement take precedence. That is the only time where these movements become valid, right? So even if you look throughout history, violence and aggressions is the only way people have ever brought forth their conflict of ideas. It's the only way these sort of movements get off the ground, right? Example, you mentioned Black Lives Matter. Great example. This was a big racism in America was a big issue even before this George Floyd incident, right? So and it was something that was talked upon for many, many, many years, and it was something that these sort of people faced on a daily basis, right? But what made it that popular? What made it that prevalent that until today we as debaters are speaking about it in this platform, right? The only thing that made it popular was the premise of aggression and violence. The only thing that made it get it off the ground was aggression and antagonism within that movement itself. So you can see here how by being antagonistic, it not only serves a purpose of getting the whole social justice movement validified, and it helps to highlight the urgency, and it helps to promote action within the social justice movement or whatever issues that you're trying to solve, right? Without what we here would like to solve the issues at hand, right? But in order for you to solve the issues at hand, you would need to involve bigger authorities. You would need to involve people of power, right? So in order for you to attract their attention, in order for you to attract attention of millions and millions of people, in order for you to have that power to be able to lobby against these sort of people that are oppressing, let's say, in order for you to lobby against the government, right, you need big firepower but without aggression, without antagonizing without antagonization, you would never have this sort of power behind your hands. We concede that these sort of things may be wrong, but at the end of the day, we have to look at it from this sort of point of view, right? So you have to look at it like, how are we going to solve the issue, and what are the drawbacks that we would like to concede, right? We would rather concede people throwing art, people spilling milk in these sort of fast food chains, and people going to protest in these sort of fast food chains about veganism, right? See, that's another good example, right? I am talking about people like antagonizing people inside a fast food restaurants, but I am still talking about it. That's the whole point of this sort of antagonization and aggression towards a social justice movement, right? The whole point is to get people talking about it. So now what happened after more and more people went into these sort of fast food restaurants, after more and more people protested against vegan food, etc., is that government are now looking at policies to change against animal cruelty. Government are now looking into what are the effects and harms of consuming meat against the environment, right? So there is policy change due to these bigger social justice movements, bigger social justice movements getting more and more antagonizing and getting more and more aggressive, right? So we see the real world benefits here. However, on your side, we don't really see any real world benefits as to how the social justice movement is going to solve the problem of the people, right? At the end of the day, that is the main issue at hand here. How many times have you seen a political change happen, or a policy change in the government, or any sort of change happen because of non-violence? It has never happened before in history. And even if you want to bring at the example of Mahatma Gandhi, right, that had silent protest that was never violent, the only reason that that movement really took place, right? That movement really took off was the prospect of violence, because they had millions of people ready to kill themselves, ready to die in order for them to defend their nation, right? It was the prospect of violence. So even if you want to bring that your best case scenario example, right, the prospect of violence and aggression always underlines any of these movements. And even if you say like, oh, it enables the stick stigma, like many of these social justice movements, like you mentioned, in these sort of developed nations, are not only within one race, right? Especially in the West. And okay, fine, even if we concede that we want to say that, oh, it's just one race, how is it going to be? How is it going to solve the problem? Yeah, you're going to stigmatize people, but it never really solves the problem. And like when you mentioned the example of black people, they are already stigmatized to being violent people, right? So there's no real harm in order for you to do this. And with that, I am proud to oppose. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, first op, for that speech. Inviting the second proposition to respond to first op. You're here. Okay, cool. DPM, DLO, third prop, third op, and replies. Are you guys okay with being recorded? That is indeed a question that you must give an answer to. Okay, Golf consents, UTM consents. Okay, yeah, sounds good. Cool. Second prop, whenever you're ready.
Hello. I'm just going to use my PM's device since my device is not working for some reason.
No worries.
Yep, thank you. And just to clarify, my name is Jones Anderson. He in pronouns, and I prefer my POS through the chat. Thank you. It is abhorrent that ops strengthen the problem by abusing the power of social movement and use that violence on the street. They miss a huge hole in their argument by not giving any social reasoning why people will listen to them and still sympathize and follow your kind of social movement without actually like giving certain policies, for example. They just immediately jumped into the benefits saying it works, violence works and aggressiveness works for them to give policies. But if you really notice exactly why Muhammad Ghani will like help those kinds of like war situation back then is because of how he's giving peaceful demonstration on the street and a lot of people sympathize with Gandhi and try to help with his cause. That is why it happened on those kinds of like situations, right? So I'm going to talk about three things in speech. One, is violent acts good? Second, is social movement in general? And secondly, and lastly, I'll bring an extension about how this impacts the movement. First question then about what violence acts is, right? Three observations. Observation number one, they claim that they mechanize that social movement just uses social media. Three things, right? One, absolutely not true. Social movement do everything to prove their movement, not just social media. Stop looking at your phone. We literally have demonstration on the street. There's a march on the field. People make interviews on the street about people actually getting harmed, like the convert woman in South Korea, etc. But second, even if that's not true, I think the debate is not about trying to get people to move, but it's about people on the ground and how they should act on the street, for example, or like in social media as well. All those kinds of things. But lastly, let's be charitable. It was quite confusing on their side because if they say social movement works online only through online, exactly that's even worse when people in Twitter are so fucking aggressive nowadays, like stand Twitter. So you do one bad thing and boom, you get cancelled. So if you do violent marching on the street, that is far worse because you made existing harm on the ground, which makes it easier to antagonize you because there is existing crime that you made on the street, which also like probably like harm certain like law and like makes you like be justified for you to be punished, for example. But second observation then, they want to talk about how they've been violated, so it's okay for them to fight back. One, no, social movement's incentive is never to fight fire with fire. Martin Luther King Jr. stand his ground with protesters to fight for equality with his amazing speech to spread confidence. LGBTQ movement shows how desperate they are, so majority which give them rights. So most social movements don't work in aggressiveness. Even if they do, most of them succeed by showing how vulnerable they are. But second, let's be charitable. We concede that they should have the ability to fight back, principally, right? But we think fighting back could happen in myriad of ways. It's quite symmetric on both sides. You can fight back by proving, look, all all their social stigma and prejudices are wrong. See how much I'm suffering right now. That is not using aggressive violent acts. You can also release anger by proving you are right and they are wrong. You release emotions and find relief in that situation as well. So let's weigh this, right? Because it's quite tough. One, under op, you get small temporary euphoria once you yell at white men and trash at the street to show off your anger. The harm of this is you will never win. No supporters want to support you because you are seen as violent and aggressive, and honestly, it seems that you can fend for yourself. So there's no incentive for you to actually support this kind of movement and give the further quota or further buy-in for the street and social capital. So op can win on this kind of small temporary benefits, but under the prop, we think if you strategize that anger, you voice out that problem that you face, use that anger as a cry for help, and make banger videos and that shows off your struggles and interruptions, etc. People are less likely to call you radical. The gray areas feel more sympathetic, and you also can let out your anger in this process. But second, weighing that, who can get closure, right? Under op, when you say you are fighting back and giving reparation, those violent acts will continue again and again because you can never feel satisfied when you destroy the streets once. You'll continue and blame the government, blame white men, and continue to become more aggressive again and again. So sure, they talk about how you agree and be justified about painting certain buckets and etc. But again, because you don't really necessarily feel satisfied from those kinds of reparations, you'll find and find certain reasons to make it more and more radical and more aggressive under your side of the house. But under our side of the house, I think you can make videos or campaign saying, I'm desperate here, why you're doing this to us, please help us, etc. This gives you further closure because you're still letting negative emotions out and people sympathize for you, which makes you feel validated and acknowledged. So we win on the long-term benefit and better closure. Before solution number 3, they talk about how BLM was popular because of aggression and violence. One, that is absolutely not true. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't left his world just for you to antagonize him. Exactly, they win by peaceful marching and show that they are not actually very violent and very harmful, which is a lot of those kind of prejudices that happen in this minority. It's because they're violent, right? But second, we flip this and say it creates friction in the movement. There'll be people who want the peace and also individuals who wanted to be violent. It makes huge debates inside the social movement where you fight against each other instead of one common enemy. So why is it better for social movement inside the movement and outside of the house? One, it's easier for you to have one certain goal and one certain common enemy for you to actually move and march on the street, for example, to find out that exactly we're trying to prove the media, for example, that we are indeed this kind of desperate and in need of help. But secondly, I think it's also important for us to really move away from those kinds of radical prejudices and stereotypes, saying that we are actually not those kinds of person and they're just trying to make us in a very, very bad light, for example, and we're actually very good people and just a normal regular people on the street. The tipping point in this debate then become who gets actually better social movement inside the movement. I think under outside the house, we prove to you how we can get better closure with one common goal. Before going into my second question, I'll be happy to take a POI. Second question then, on social movement in general. I think under our side of the house, if you want to talk about efficacies, exactly once we actually prove to you how we can gain certain buy-ins and certain supporters, it's easier for us to gain a certain move and march on the street. For example, how hashtag Stop Asian Hate have a lot of people moving on the street, even people from BLM movement also sympathizes with by relating towards what we're happening. Under your side of the house, exactly when you use certain aggressive movement and certain violent acts, I don't know, painting buckets you wanted, exactly people don't see you as something or a vulnerable actor on the street. They don't really see what you're trying to do, so you shift focus on them instead of trying sympathize with you and actually what you wanted as your goal or your movement in general. They see you as someone doing something bad acts, so you're not seeing as oh, this is really good environmentalist. You're just seeing as someone who's in a group filled with radical people. That is why under your side those kinds of further shift in towards what your focus on the movement in the majority in the media's eyes is very, very harmful for you to get. So those kinds of efficacy will never happen anyways under your side of the house. Please engage on this. Second, I think under our side of the house, the efficacies far come easier. Sure, we don't have certain huge promotions of being so unique to be violent, for example. But again, it's a good thing for you to actually act how you are really desperate, for example, or you really don't have anyone to hold onto. So it proves how desperate or how in a minority you are on those kinds of social structures or social hierarchies, right? So it's easier for us to sympathize for you. It's easier for the media to say you really have no one anymore. So let's support those kinds of minorities for them to gain policies and for them to push for their social capitals. Those kinds of things, very, very good. Moving on to my extension about how does it impact the movement. One, why is this bad for social movement in general? I think there's less support, there's less sympathy, but second, it creates more prejudices, proving the majority claim is correct. It's principally immoral for you how we have fought for so long for equality and you reset us to 100 years ago. Our argumentation wasn't saying stigmatizing is true, but we say this stigmatization is perceived to be true, which is why they oppress the communities even more. I made some they like white doctors don't look at pregnant black women because they think they are strong enough. That's why we don't want to second the stigmatization. For all those reasons, very proud to propose.
Cool. Thank you, second prop, for that speech. Inviting second op here.
Sorry, could I just get a minute? Thank you. Hope I'm audible.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So before we go on to the ops case study on this whole debate, first op would like to rebut some of the points given by both Deputy Prime Minister and Prime Minister. First, I'll start off with Deputy Prime Minister. From him, from his perspective, he was saying, saying that when people are violent, their they will their ideologies or their whole concept of idea what they're fighting for, this won't be prevailed. They'll just be looked at violent, and that would be the only standing point that is displayed there. Again, I think this whole debate has been centered upon this BLM movement, mainly because this BLM movement is one of the many protests that happens, which with the intention of happening peacefully, but unfortunately resorted to violence. That is one of the separate op points that we will have on later. But when they said that, oh, this would just be looked on as violence in itself, again, time and time and again, we know what BLM stands for. We know what they want to achieve. Violence is just a way to introduce their concept of idea into the mainstream. Once they have that, that is the platform where we will discuss what will happen. Again, they are trying to portray this whole case plan as saying they are just, they are just mindless warriors. They are just army men who just want to go and kill people, who just want to go and destroy things. No, these are not people who intend violence, but these are people who are pushed upon to a certain extent. They have to act with aggression and with violence accordingly because they are forced to do it. Government is trying to live in this utopian world where they're living in this utopian world where, oh, if you have a problem, you can go to the authorities, you can go to the police, you can go to the court, and automatically your problems will be solved through this simple lawful procedure. If you have, they said a ridiculous thing, and this is almost to the point of laughable. They said having video campaigns to solve their problems. This isn't a GoFundMe page. This isn't a Kickstarter campaign. This is revolution. And for you to have a revolution, there has to, unfortunately, I know you want to live in your little perfect world, but you have to resort to violence. There has to be a point of violence, because not because we want it, but we are forced to act upon it. Another thing that I would really like to have upon, or really like to ask a question against government, which they never tend to clarify, is what happens when the oppressors are the one who instigate that violence? What happens when the policemen start hitting? Because that's what happened time and time again. BLM, the policemen start hitting. I'm not sure if government is really aware. With the Bersih movement happened in Malaysia, the police started hitting because government authorities wanted them out. What happens then? Do they still say violent? Do they still say, oh, I know the police are hitting, but I won't hit back because I don't want to instigate violence. I'll just, the police can hit me all they want. I'll take POIs after one point. The police can hit me all they want, and I'll just, silently go back. No, that does not happen. Going to some of the rebuttals of leader of opposition, again, when he said the fact that George Floyd was killed why? Because of a stereotype. He said it in a sense that it was justifiable. Killing George Floyd because of the stereotype that black men are violent is justifiable. And after that, him saying, oh, the BLM movement just perpetuates this. Again, violence is the BLM. the DOJ already had a case study about this, and they concluded violence was instigated by the police. This is the same thing for when Carter was running for president, in Chicago, when the violence was starting there. The DOJ concluded that violence was started by the police. Time and time and again, violence is started by the oppressors. But when we, the people who are supporting the social movements, we tend to find back, we are looked as violent, we are looked as aggressive and antagonistic, and we have to resort to that. With that, I'll first take the POIS.
Number one, self-defense is not the scope of this debate. It's talking about advocacy. We don't understand why that's the problem. But number two, understand that we never stigmatize Black people as aggressive. We only told you how it enables inequality to respond to that.
Understood. No, self-defense was one of the reasons I'm rebutting the points you said against, because we never had a clarification on that point. I'll go straight to the points that we have. Aggression, for the first point that the op has to place is aggression and antagonistic behavior is an inevitable byproduct of social change. These are some things that are inevitable when you want to have revolution. Again, the examples that I already have, when there is a movement that is supporting something that the government or higher officials, the police, they do not support, obviously there's going to be backlash towards this. And how does this backlash occur? Again, op is living in this world where you can just go to the streets, have a peaceful protest, and come back home. When you're screaming to the police that you're killing innocent lives in the millions, obviously the police is going to retaliate. The police aren't there. Again, remember BLM protest when American cities were filled with tanks and were filled with army vehicles. They look like a scene straight out of war crimes because the police wanted to instigate this. The police wanted to prove a point. And when protesters are acting upon it, protesters are proving that, yes, we have to be aggressive. If you're fighting back, we have to be aggressive. Why is that being retaliated? Why are suddenly we as the protesters looked at the bad guy for doing the same thing that the oppressors are doing? And when we're coming back to the main point had by placed by the government, saying that acts like spilling milk, throwing paint at expensive paintings, these are just annoying aggressions that are pointless. Don't say they are pointless, because there is heavy policy changes in countries that are instigated by these things. Climate change is a genuine threat. Animal abuse is a genuine threat. And when vegans in a whole, and when people going against people supporting the need for that to be policies, so climate change doesn't go on further, when they take to these extremes, these aggressive extremes, don't say they are useless. Tell me how many Twitter handles that support this. Tell me how many peaceful protests for your man, how many cases placed in court, how many cases have brought in change. Very few, compared to when people resort to these aggressive solutions. Yes, they might be annoying. Yes, it might hurt you, but unfortunately the reality of the situation is it does bring in actual change. And I go on to the second point, because running in time, it is easier for the oppressors to oppress when they know that people fighting for social movements will always refrain from being aggressive and antagonistic. When the oppressors know that these people will never resort to violence, that is their opportunity. We can kick them however they want, they will never retaliate. Again, I remind you the genocide that happened in Sri Lanka, when the Sri Lankan government oppressed against the Tamils. When the Tamils never retaliated, they knew that they could take advantage. But when the Tamils started to retaliate, yes, it was violent, yes, it was aggressive, but the Tamils retaliated. And because of that, they have the minute respect that they have in Sri Lanka. Yes, a lot of people were affected by it, but that is genuine change. People got to know about this genocide. What would happen if protesters were always silent? They would never retaliate. We would just die. We'd become a generation that is numb of all of our social rights. And with that, the opposition has never been proud to oppose today's statement. Thank you.
Thank you, second op. Inviting third prop.
Give me time to go to the toilet. Just 2 minutes. Is it fine?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I'm back. Am I clearly audible? Okay.
Yeah, great.
Nice. Sorry for taking a long time. Yep. If you want to prepare, just give it to the chat. Probably gonna take about some 30 things. It's about social movements anyway. So yep. I don't mean to offend anyone. I'm going to start my speech in PR to the chat. Gonna take 1 minute 5. 3, 2, 1. The way that you pay out for victims of sexual violence cases is not to let them do the same crime or punch the perpetrators in the face to do a form of violation, but to give them a chance of attempts on getting to the court to fight for the compensation that they deserve, i.e. getting apology, prison time for the perpetrators, or monetary punishment that gives them actual compensation. Crime for another crime just doesn't make sense in any occasions. This should go the same to the key actors of social movements who were previously being oppressed. The way you pay out for them is to not support them to also do the same thing. Fighting people on the street, they are just certainly a form of oppression and only result to more hatred and negative stereotype towards them. That's exactly what my PM talk about. But to let them to do peaceful demonstration, policy campaign, or lobbying to the government to seek for better policy and affirmative action that compensates to the things that they've been through. At least if they've been oppressed, then now they have to be peaceful, right? To not just do the oppression again and again. And these debates should be consensus panels that certain movements will fight on both sides for what they deserve. Since the motion is blatantly a narrative on how do they fight. So what differs is just the strategy. Which one is more effective to get the result that we want? Is it being aggressive or being diplomatic and outside of the house? This clarification is important because A, it dismisses all the facts that they're saying that, oh, House L and they all talk that we won't do anything because we're still gonna fight, right? But what only differs is only strategy that we're gonna use. And one thing that you should dismiss from DPM about saying that violence is just gonna be a self-defense mechanism. A, is literally contradictory. LO already agreed on us that this debate talks about the strategy of fighting the structural injustice, meaning that it's talking about like the advocacy that we will use. But secondly, even if we want to defend that using like violence, to not use violence as a self-defense, we're gonna be happily to take that because A, this is literally what CGS is all about, right? Your duty as a person when you're being violated is not to fight back, right? But to report to the police. But to retrospectively is much more beneficial because the only reason why BLM could be successful was because like how George Floyd's video of being hopelessly took off by white police was getting viral, right? Because he didn't fight back. He was hopeless there. And people sympathize for that, right? This is exactly what feeds the interest of social movements to get what they deserve, to help people more sympathizing to them, to see that probably it's true that the black people are being dismissed and oppressed by society, that the stereotypes are still so huge in the status quo. Please dismiss it as this idea. I'm going to talk about two main classes. First, about whether or not this narrative is justified to exist, but two, what is actually an effective strategy to fight for injustice. Firstly, whether or not this narrative is justified to exist. A, PM taught you how this narrative subscribes to the interest of certain movements itself to seek for peace, to get less discrimination, etc. And I want to note that LO to DLO never responds or like bring like any counter narrative to this, right? Insofar that they can prove why these are not true, meaning that these justifications are still very worthy to be created by you. Let's recharacterize where does this narrative most probably come from. I think this narrative probably comes from people who are tired of the hostile actions from the social movements, i.e., people who have the fact that environmentalists pour out the things to famous paintings like Mona Lisa, of like how the black movements do like this stuff, like refers like racism to the white people, right? But secondly, it also comes from people who think that it's probably ineffective, right? I.e., supporters who've been like observing and see that probably this hostile advocacy has created nothing, right? Meaning that this narrative on where does it come from ultimately aligns with the interest of social movement itself. Is perfectly justified. But two, notice that how retrospectively this is not what the social movement seek anyway. Because DPM taught you how Martin Luther didn't want to kill off the white people or making them to not be able to get educations, but what Martin Luther wanted was to them to just understand that probably the barrier for the black people are too high because of the discrimination, right? Greta Thunberg currently didn't want people who don't care about environment to die anyway, but to learn how to care for the environment to make a better result at the end of the day, right? Meaning that what fulfills the spirit of certain movements then is literally the peaceful demonstration whatsoever that comes exactly from this narrative. The goal is to never make others marginalized in certain movements, but the goal of the movement is to just get the same rights as the other parties, the majorities, right? Meaning that, it's perfectly justified for us to have this narrative. These two principles are crucial, and it's also totally being dismissed by opposition. In so far the opposition can justify the narrative, it's perfectly fine for us then for having this narrative to exist, because there is no urge for opposition to not support this. It's just a critical version of how minorities should fight back, but not just in a form of aggressive and antagonistic approaches, but to seek for like the more effective ones by being peaceful. So the movement will still seek out for their voices in our side. The only thing that differs is that they have better rational calculus in deciding what they will do by the existence of this critical narrative, that they should be like more peaceful on the campaigns that they do. Secondly, what is an effective strategy to fight for injustice? But before that, any POI? 3, 2.
Yes, the POI is, you said that Martin Luther King always wanted peaceful and never instigated violence, but why was he in support of the Black Panther movement, a movement known for being aggressive and instigating violence?
I'm going to engage that later. Secondly, what is an effective strategy to fight for injustice? I want to note that one simple example doesn't determine the whole result, right? Just because like Martin Luther or like any others have subscribed to this strategy once, it doesn't mean that it's probably the most effective one, right? Because that only happened once, and after that Martin Luther changed his strategy, it means that that strategy is ineffective after all, right? And notice the opposite, the whole point is for people to talk about it. This why it's an effective strategy. I want to know two things. A, sure, we agree. People will talk about it, but none of that matters in so far that they cannot prove why the discourse is positive, right? This blatant analysis from LO, I never get any positive cases from this. 2, why the discourse, even if people talk about it, is gonna be so bad. A, there's gonna be like sentiments of valuable things getting dismissed, i.e., people who like us seeing the valuable arts being taken off by the environmentalists, people who cannot eat meat so often, but sees it being thrown away by the vegans. 2, the development of stigmas. When they see the black movements aggressively doing a bully on some white people on the street, threatening their stigma, that probably they're hostile. We're not saying that it's true, panel, but it's what most people will believe in exactly because of the structural prejudice that already existed in all of these centuries. But thirdly, it's also the ick of people of how they see this movement being taken unseriously, because they wonder why the fuck do feminists do mirroring to the men if what they want is equality. That's just a reverse operation, making people also adopt the essence of movements at the end of the day. Meaning that whatever impact they will bring by the idea of people talking about it is gonna be bad and effective to achieve the goal of the fight from certain movement, right? It's gonna be better in our side comparatively, because A, people are more leaning to sympathize when they see that we're actually trying our best to fight by doing social media discourse on Twitter, or like huge demonstration even under the very hot weather in some countries for a whole day long, but also being kind and not hostile, to not return injustice by also doing once, making people think that we're actually being discriminated and we're actually suffering from it and we're fighting for it. But secondly, people have more room to understand our background. In up, what they see is we're being hostile. In our side, they see that we're actually trying to educate them by the content that we post on social media. But lastly, it's also how governmental bodies have more incentives to help us, simply because we don't offend them, we don't follow CGS, we lobby to them, we're proud to propose.
Cool. Thank you, third prop. Inviting third op.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, clear.
Okay, so my name is Dion and I'll be the opposition whip for today. So my pronouns are she, her, and I will prefer my POIs verbally. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So members of the jury, from what we can hear from side government case today is that their case is very utopian and very hypocritical. They seem to not be able to address why the oppressed should not fight back against the aggressors with violence, even though they are being constantly met with violence pushed in their face. Silent protests, they also seem to not mention anything about how these silent protests, how these marches actually end. And they usually end with the police macing them and hosing them down just to disperse them and get them to leave. And they seem to think that, by calling the police, everything will be great, everything will be done. If you're angry, just go on a march, don't do anything about it. March, try marching, try marching a little. Maybe that will seize your anger. They also do not say how their case actually benefits the social movements. On our case, we've already explained many times how their case is completely utopian and ineffective, obsolete at best. And I would even go so far as to accuse them of cherry picking scenarios in which they only pointed out where peaceful protests actually work. They did not concede They said that these peaceful protests, all the scenarios that were actually successful in their favor were all pointed out in the past of great violence and oppression, where this pacifism was actually a great trait, a very prominent trait. But now in this world of moral gray and white, we can't really say what's wrong, what's right, and who are we to refrain these mainstream social movements from being aggressive? Who are you to tell these people that they should not be so angry to the point of aggressive, not knowing that these people, the protesters, the people involved, they are forced to the very edge of their case. They have to be aggressive. They have to be antagonistic for things to happen because they've been oppressed probably the whole of their lives, and you are telling them to go on a march, to call the police. The police are controlled by the aggressors themselves. We are talking about mainstream social movements that are very big, and most of these, probably all of these, are usually caused by the injustice caused by the politicians, caused by people in power. And who are you to say that police are not considered authoritative figures that have a certain authority, have a certain power towards what the people do? And these people, they are all blinded by the benefits that they get from the aggressors. There are no It is a very common fact, a very known fact, that the police are no longer completely for the people. They are for their paychecks. They're for the things that they are not for. They are not The authoritative figures are no longer for dispelling the injustice suffered by the people. But on Gulf case, they want to have the authority to refrain these people from being aggressive, antagonistic, completely dismissing their feelings, the oppression that they have suffered through the entirety of their lives. And even on our side, our worst case is that there will be riots, there will be violence, but there will be change, there will be discussions, and people are more likely to sympathize with us, because what's pushing these people to the edge so much that they have to resort to violence? And if people see you protesting on the street, the headlines are not going to be, oh, these protesters are like protesting, da, 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 da. It's going to be silent protesters, block traffic, and outrageous netizens. You're blocking traffic. You're not getting your voice out there because this is a silent protest. You're just walking on the street, holding a sign. You're not getting your voice out there. This is more harmful to the social movement than not. You are giving the aggressors the chance to like turn the tables to make you seem more like the inconvenience to the people on the ground. And people on the ground, they start to believe that these protests, these social movements, they're useless. They're kind of useless. Like, you're just like protesting, marching. You're not doing anything about it. You're not making moves. You're just sitting there. You're just walking there. You're just walking on the street hoping to get your voice out. You're not even talking. You're not loud enough for there to be actual movement, to be there to be an actual ripple in the people's understanding towards what they used to believe were right and wrong. And in their best case, it's peace. And that's it. That peace in this era of, I said POIs verbally. And in this era of peace of moral gray and white, you are expecting the politicians who are commonly known to be corrupt to be for the people. You're expecting these politicians to go through months and months of revision in what the rules, or to amend it to for some people, because they don't believe the people have a voice in this era. We want power to the people. We are not letting these politicians turn the tides anymore. Okay, POIs.
We
One,
told you
two.
that people will still have voices in our side. People can still do demonstrations. People can still do campaigns. People can still do lobbying in the government. In your side, you're being hostile. Nothing changes from that. Please engage to us. Don't be dismissive.
So, what is defined as aggressive by who? Who are the people that are actually being more relevant here? It's the people of the media. It's the people that are controlling the media. And when you are being even slightly aggressive, it can, even if you are like doing marches, or I forgot the examples that you said, those can also be twisted and considered aggressive because they would inevitably affect something. But that something will only be considered a minor inconvenience to most of the people, instead of being the worst being said to. And I would like to say that the contradiction pointed out by the government was completely invalid, as the self-defense thing said by the DLO was based on the rebuttal towards you and not towards us. So the only reason why we are seen as violent and frightening in the end is because we are not getting our voice out there enough for there to not be any misunderstandings towards the social movement that we are representing. And in Gulf case, again, utopian, hypocritical. Who are you to say? Who are you to refrain these people from being aggressive? Okay, so with this, I end my case. Never proud to oppose. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Inviting op reply.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, in our chat, we mentioned that the leader of opposition would be doing reply. Unfortunately, his line is a bit problematic. So deputy leader of opposition will be doing reply.
Okay,
Just give
cool.
me 15 seconds. Hope I'm audible. Thank you. Starting my reply in 3, 2, 1. So in this reply, we'll look at why op. I think from both sides, looking at both sides, why op definitely takes the win for this case. And I'll start off with saying, government rarely declined or rarely took the fault when we accuse them of many things. But one thing I believe that one thing said by the government that I think that both sides would perfectly agree upon is both sides, we are striving for social change. At the end of the day, we want we want the oppressed to have social change and move up the ladder in the society, and for there to be change in the world. And something that the government whip said was a perfect example of it, which he said that both sides, what we're debating is which side would be more effective, the aggressive path that we as the op are taking, or the much more peaceful, much more one-sided path the government is taking. And that is something that we can completely agree upon, and that is where I'll base this case study upon. When we look at government side, what they are saying is, oh, they're constantly accusing our side of being just violent. We have no change, we bring no change towards the party, saying that this would just take back to olden days where violence was the only resort. Now we have a lot of, again, we accuse them of being utopian because they are saying, let's make campaign videos, let's just lobby to politicians, because politicians are going to listen to the people. Politicians only interests aren't to keep their powerful friends in power. Politicians only interests aren't to make sure they get enough money from oil companies. Politicians only interest isn't to make sure that they have they launder enough money. Their only interest is to make sure the people are benefiting from everything. That's what we know, right? It's laughable almost. So when they living in an idealistic when they're living in an utopian idealistic world where they say that you can go lobby to politicians, you can create campaign videos about it, it's almost laughable. Let's even take government at its best case. We're saying, okay, let's just assume all politicians are good people. There are no bad politicians, there are no corrupt police officers, and everyone is good. Everyone is good. And when you go with the complaint saying that, oh, there's animal torture in this poultry factory, immediately, regardless whether that company is that company is a donor of one of the politicians, regardless of any of it, they'll just go and investigate it. That is government's best case. Government's best case scenario lobbies debates on the premise that politicians are good people, everyone are good people, the law will always be followed, police won't hit back. That is their premise, and it will follow smoothly with no hiccups whatsoever. Now let's take our case even in its worst scenario. I'm not even trying to promote us as being ideal. Even at our worst scenario, yes, we concede to the fact that there will be fights, there will be violence, there will be aggression towards and from officials. But Unfortunately for the government, in our scenario, we will have at least the minimal change. We concede to the fact that yes, there will be damage of properties, there will be damage of people's emotions, but at the end of the day, change is only present here. Now, which side looks much more believable? A side that says that even at their best, they're assuming that all politicians are good people, the law will always be followed, or a side was saying, which we concede, saying that yes, look, violence is inevitable, but at the end of the day, it will bring change with solid examples, with solid case studies, rather than them saying that you can create again, I bring this campaign videos because it is quite laughable with no valid example whatsoever. The only reason we have examples, the only reason we have examples of a protest that was successful, or civil movements that were successful through violence, is because it happens throughout history. Change is brought only when people become radical. And even when change is brought, even if people become radical, that is has its harmful effects, at the end of the day, change that we want will be brought. With that, I think operates his case. Thank you.
Thank you. Proper play.
Yeah, hi. Am I audible?
Yeah, great.
Great. Thank you for the confirmation. Right. Starting reply in 3, 2, and 1. 3 clarifications, right? Number 1, both sides should agree that movements are already moving and pushing for progressivity in the current status quo. So understand that opposition's framing on how movements are currently online is currently invalid. That's literally their main identity. We don't understand why that's fucking likely to happen. But number 2, in the words of DLO, right? In the words of DLO, the debate is laughable. True. What's laughable is the fact that they strawman our case. Never had a thought in my life that I had to fucking reclarify a case in reply speech. Two things. A, what we told you was that black people were stigmatized by the police, therefore engaging in violence will enable that, right? No response as to why it's not likely on their side of the house, right? The marginal harms arises on their side of the house, and it's very huge. Especially when they told you that the police is bad, we don't understand why suddenly when you suddenly become like violent towards the police, because this stigmatization exists towards the police, why they will suddenly treat you very nicely, right? No counter narrative on that. But number 2, understand that what we told you isn't the fact that these actions of throwing milk, etc., are literally ridiculous and useless. But what we told you was that the discussion that comes out of it, even if there's going to be discussion, is something that's unproductive, right? They keep on running away from the burden without explaining why this is going to be likely to happen. And this is literally the characterization of aggressive acts that we already told you, right? The whole point of this clarification is to prove how dismissive they have been from the case, exactly what we told you underground. But thirdly, what's very ridiculous is the fact that they haven't even characterized to you what aggressive means, right? What being aggressive or violent means on their side of the house. We already told you on literally the first minute of our speeches in Prime Minister regarding what it's going to look like when you are aggressive, what it's going to look like when you're violent, etc. Most likely the kinds of advocacy that you do is going to be very ridiculous, right? People see it as unreasonable. This is literally the kinds of like setup that you should actually buy, because this is literally a setup. We've already engaged to this, right? They haven't told you as to why this is necessarily not the best form of aggressive that we should be debating about, right? Exactly. It should be brought under our side of the house. They tried to bring a new case regarding how, oh, aggressive means self-defense. We don't understand, right? That's exactly the right of every people to do self-violence. That's literally written in the law that you can actually do self-violence. We don't understand why social movements are not able to do that. We're talking in the form of like advocacy as to why advocacy when it comes to violence is not something that's good. We portray to you what kinds of advocacy will be done in terms of like using aggressivity, etc. Right? Necessarily, one of them isn't self-violence, right? You have not one of them is not necessarily self-defense. Exactly. This shows to you the quality of setup by both sides of the house. It's clear who should be brought in this debate. Two things on clashes. Number one regarding principle on social movements and progressivity, but number two regarding efficacy of the movement, right? On the second clash. But first, let's talk about the principle of social movements and progressivity. What did they tell you on their side of the house? That A, violence is very important to do self-defense, not understand why this is important, but number two, regarding how violence is important to move the people. What did we tell you on the our side of the house? The principle hasn't been rebutted. You should buy this principle all 100%. A, that we told you the principle of social movements of wanting equality and like stability and peace. Therefore, they should pursue peace as well. But number two, as to how in the current status quo, the violence is literally counter-progressive to the progressive to the progress that social movements have already brought to the table, right? The weighing is very simple. A, we don't understand why. I don't have to reiterate it 3 times, right? But number two, understand that there's no engagement coming from governments out of the house at all. A, why is it okay to necessarily go against the promotion or like the progressivity of peace that social movement have been promoting this whole time, and why is it in line with their interest to actually engage to violence? But number two, they haven't explained to you as well as to why it's not going to stigmatize the people, right? Why it's not going to set them back 100 years, right? Because people now is going to see it as a violent movement that cannot do anything but get angry on the streets, right? They haven't told you that. We've already pushing that burden so many times towards like our speeches. They haven't engaged to that. Never buy their argumentations. But number two, regarding practical as to efficacy of the movement, what did they tell you on their side of the house? They told you that suddenly policies will pass and sympathy when you do the violence will suddenly arise out of no reason, right? What did we tell you? That A, moving the emotions of the people are literally so good, not engaging to violence enables that because people see that we are already currently being oppressed. We are most likely the hopeless one in the situation, therefore people should support us. But number two, we already told you as to why there are going to be alternatives such as lobbying the government, etc., etc. The way is very simple on this one is who have already told you the most mechanized like practical benefits we brought to the debate. It's clearly under government side of the house, therefore vote for government. Very proud to win.
Cool. Thank you everyone.